So everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for joining this event. I'm very happy to chair this this hour and a half, more or less, conversation with very interesting speakers, friends, colleagues, practitioners, activists, numbers of different roles and forms of practice we're going to hear today. Two words on kind of an etiquette or organization. We're going to give about 20-25 minutes presentation time to both Kinsani and Tendi, and to Salma if she is able to join us. And then we open for a conversation, so questions, reflections from online and from the people in London in the room. My only suggestion would be to either type questions and comments in chat. I'm going to try to relay back to the authors, but I also wanted that everyone would feel sufficiently free and comfortable to engage in a conversation, speaking up somehow. Whenever the time will be, and also a conversation between the different speakers that I hope will be. Oh, excellent! Finally, was buying time to get Salma connected. I'm super happy. So we've officially be able to kicking off. Salma, thank you very much. My name is Camillo Boano. I'm very happy, and I'm working with the BUD program in the development planning unit. And we have been organizing this event, this kind of opportunity to think. And we organized this starting when we were in pandemic a few years back, in order to get a kind of connection, Salma, hi, of alumni, colleague, practitioners to engage in an hour and a half conversation on practice, on other forms of practice. We call it this, of course, otherwise, in order to chip into a form of thinking that is beyond an alternative, beyond something next, but something that is really completely out of and beyond the frameworks we are normally used to think through, to think with. We have an excerpt on the website that titled down the series of the event that we had in the years back, and those two, this Friday and the next Friday ahead. From Dan Abdullah, that is quoted in a book from Arturo Escobar, that speaks about otherwise, or thinking otherwise, as another way of thinking that runs counter to the modernist or colonial modernist narrative, that locates our inquiry into the very border systems of thoughts and reach towards the possibility of non-Eurocentric, non-colonial mode of thinking. And this is a little bit the framework around which we have asked three different people, three different practitioners, activists and thinkers to share their own thoughts to approach the issue. I'm not indulging too much in presenting them very specifically. If you want, on the website, there is a sufficient biography of all of them and a sort of abstract of what they're going to speak. I'm just very saying just few words. Today we have three speakers. We have Kinsani Ducorte-Leclerc, which is an architectural researcher and designer from Johannesburg, working across practice and teaching also in Zurich. We have Salma Nassar, who just joined us, which is an architect and an urban designer from Cairo in Egypt. And she is a BUD alumna from 2017, so it's super happy to hear also as a connection to alumni and to BUD, if you want, individual that have been going around the world to try somehow to practice otherwise. Salma is at the moment working for the UN Habitat and also having her own practice and Candy Lowerthon, which is an architectural designer that use design fictions and performances to think very much across different forms of territorial investigation. And she's a senior tutor at the Royal College of Art. And I must say that I've been the privilege to learn from Tandy, being working when she was doing her PhD at the Bartlett. So I'm very indebted to that kind of learning. So without any further ado, and with this limited presentation to all of you, feel free to speak a little bit more about yourself if you want. The original idea is to keep each presentation one following the other, around 20-25 minutes. So hold your questions, hold your comments, and write them into the chat or after when we start the conversation. So without any further ado, I'm very, very happy and thanking you again to be with us, to give the floor to you. I think we haven't discussed who's going first, but I think it's very easy. Let's do it. Whoever has the presentation more ready to go to share the screen, I'm very happy to give you the floor. So I wonder, Tandy, can you go first, and then Kinsani, and then Salma? I think that would be my chair privilege. Okay. Thank you very much. Excellent.
We're all caught in a kind of eye staring each other out to see. Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. Okay. Great. I actually have the very good fortune that this is one of the first talks that I've done this year, so I'm still figuring out how Zoom works again, but also still full of energy. And so thank you so much for this this invitation. What a fantastic way to start the year. And yes, Camilo, you stole my opening line. I was going to say I was enormously fortunate to do my PhD in part under Camilo's excellent and inspiring stewardship, who well, all of you in the room will know about much more as well at the moment. And so much of this work that I'm going to present is really indebted to him too. So let me tell you a story. Lusaka's ground is full of holes. Here, sites in the city where something or something different should be abound, which deny the clarity and the certainty in the present that a physical encounter with the past brings. Instead of reading these holes as absences or as vacuums, I'm rather going to engage in a kind of close reading of the contours of these holes to determine how matter fills these voids and what matter fills these voids, and to understand, as M. Norbisi Philip calls on us to do, how our lives are in turn shaped by negative space or by the surrounding emptiness which we as African people grow. And when you're digging into the earth, this is, in itself is a kind of time travel. And I'm going to talk about digging into the earth quite a lot, in which layers of the past and the present and the future are disturbed in the process. Here, what has been no longer is as it was, and is now something different, something new, something other, and something in the process of being remade through enormous pressure and force. So fittingly then, I'm going to move somewhat anarchically also through time, and I invite you to sit with me at once in the long now of geological formation in the 70s in newly independent Zambia, and then a few decades later during the economic, social, and epistemic violence of structural adjustment, and then austerity, while also meandering down Cairo Road, which is the scene that you see here in the passenger seat of a taxi in 2018. Somehow we're also in 2021, having recently buried Kenneth Kaunda, who was the first president of Zambia. And in the words of the writer and critic Percy Jomoya, the last surviving symbol of the era of high nationalism in Southern Africa. So Lusaka's ground is full of holes. This is Katangan metasedimentary rock, which meets Precambrian granitic matter and is then subject to the near, the kind of energies of the near atmosphere, so humidity, precipitation, flooding, and pressure, and then the influence of our lunar and solar interstellar companions, heat, light, wind, gravity, dark matter, which has resulted in formations of ground and earth of almost impossible complexity. So here we have alluvial deposits in suburbs such as Ninwundeke, Kamwena, Ibex, and Silverest, where loose soil and sediment formed by the erosive flow of water have become deposited above the bedrock, covering this large area to the west of the city. And this becomes highly permeable ground, full of fine particles, almost as hollow as much as it is solid. Its high porosity making it paradoxically rich, full of air, moisture, and life. Elsewhere under the city are meta-limestones. So a kind of kyanitic schist, which is riddled with faults, sudden disjunctions in the layers of the earth, which set time and matter out of joint, leaving folds and hinges and slippages and clean and kind of uneven areas where clean lines of progress should be. These rocks form an underground terrain of caverns, which are connected by uneven tunnels. And this kind of rock formation is known as karst. Over time, holes in the karst have joined together, producing a vast underground network of sinkholes and cavities, extending 25 meters below the ground and storing all of the city's water. Every so often, the layer of soil, which typically conceals this underground landscape, completely disappears, washed away, or it's removed by hand. And here, urban miners have found potential, quarrying the stone for aggregate to feed the concrete production of this ever-growing city. Young men and children will pile waste, logs, and tires into these holes and set them alight, taking turns to stoke the fire and soften the rock. And then, after several hours of this heat, pour in cold water, the temperature shock splintering these large fragments off the stone. And then these are painstakingly crushed by hand at the side of the road, typically by older women, and sold in bags of tiny stone pieces for almost negligible amounts relative to the huge amount of collective intergenerational labor involved. This is violent work, leaving in its wake blackened, jagged stone and discarded packets of single-shot alcohol. Backs and necks and limbs and lungs, which are strained irreversibly. Fire smoke, which irritates the eyes, the skin, the mucous membranes that line the body's internal organs, depresses the central nervous system, slows the neurological functioning, and in some cases leads to delirium and coma. Elsewhere in the city, wealthier residents have pierced the earth by further plunging thousands of private boreholes into the ground, drawing water up for private individual use and taking advantage of weak regulation and the steady erosion of public services resulting from the structural adjustment programs of privatization and liberalization imposed by the World Bank and the IMF in Zambia. But there are also rumors of another series of excavations, a series of secret underground tunnels and bunkers built between 1974 and 1976 by Energo Project engineers sent to Zambia by former Yugoslav leader Josip Broz Tito, who was then a close friend of President Kaunda. The Energo Project engineers had been publicly contracted to construct a number of projects above ground in preparation for the 1970 summit of the non-aligned movement. And most notably, these included the really quite incredible Mulungushi Conference Center built to host the proceedings, and Findeco House, which is on Cairo Road, which remains one of Zambia's tallest buildings. But there are also other kinds of solidarities being forged and built in this moment of kind of cross-collaboration and cross-building of newly independent Zambia. And in a bizarre twist in Zambian politics in 1995, another series of secret tunnels were revealed during the electoral politics of that time. The tunnels, which were perhaps indicative of the fragility of the Zambian independence project at the time. And at the time, Kaunda supporters described these tunnels as a part of a security upgrade of the presidential palace of State House, a part of a bomb-proof kind of command and control center, which was built for the country just after independence in the event of a South African attack. The tunnels were supposedly built by the Energo Project engineers, and tours of these tunnels were given to reporters by government officials, which revealed a strange series of spaces held underneath the city, One journalist writes of entering through a built-in wardrobe, which when gently maneuvered would give away, exposing a dark tunnel leading to a series of underground rooms. Here were living quarters equipped with bunk beds and a broadcasting station and a 5-kilowatt transmitter, meeting rooms, and a weapons store. So karst, which is the geological formation in which this is all taking place, is named after a region in Slovenia, former Yugoslavia, where it is abundant and notoriously tricky to build on. Prone to sinkholes and instability and liable to change between the time of surveying and the start of construction, karst requires a really careful control of both the surface and the underground water to protect underground conditions to protect against water infiltration. So accounts from these secret tunnels under the presidential state house actually describe that they'd been very poorly utilized and poorly looked after. So damp was seeping into the carpets, rotting wood lining this long tunnel leading up to a bricked up exit opposite the 18th green of the Lusaka City Golf Club. The same engineers built a number of buildings close to State House along Gumbo Road and President's Lane. And it stands to reason that these could have underground tunnels and connections too. I find evidence for this tunnel in an anecdote referencing an incident in 1978 when a troop of Selous scouts, a special forces regiment of the Rhodesian government, attempted to assassinate Joshua Nkomo, who was then the leader of the Zimbabwe African People's Union, ZAPU. Perversely, this story is quite comical, betraying the tragedy of Nkomo's life in exile, lived under constant threat. So what happened is the Rhodesians had engaged in undercover reconnaissance on Nkomo's safe house by becoming members of this golf club. They were performing the act of playing golf while actually rehearsing this assault that they were going to do on Nkomo's safe house. And they actually built a replica home in Nkomo barracks in what was then known as Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. And on the day, a team of assassins attacked on land and by air. But Nkomo is said to have quietly evaded the attackers through a little window at the back, finding his way into safety at State House against the odds. No one could quite make sense of how Nkomo climbed out of a window when there was this helicopter attack, all of these troops coming over the land and into this safe house. And so the only thing that makes sense to me and to the many people that I speak to is a series of other tunnels built during this period. As the covert legacy of the Energo project slowly dissolves under the ground and in this series of dismantling, dissolving tunnels, hoardings and billboards above ground in construction sites in Lusaka City now reveal new relations and axes of power which are playing out. China Jiangxi Corporation is building a new airport. China Geoengineering Corporation is contracted to improve and forge new roads. Sunshare Limited, a subsidiary of Fujian Kaiyuan Investment and Development Company Limited, is constructing a new tower, and China Jiangsu International Economic and Technical Cooperation Group is tasked with building a new multi-facility international conference center. China is Zambia's largest overall investor, with majority stakes in 3 out of 7 of the largest producing mines in the country. China also dominates in the construction and steel manufacturing industries, winning the large majority of large-scale tenders in the country. So as these new relations take shape above ground, they also take shape below ground too. A taxi driver told me with complete certainty about yet more secret underground tunnels, this time built by the Chinese government and leading from the new site of State House to the new airport. Apparently, allegedly, these tunnels are large enough for a car to drive through. In fact, the taxi driver assured me that a whole fleet of cars is already down there and it is entirely clad in gleaming red tiles. When pressed, he claims to have seen video footage of these tunnels, which he said that he would WhatsApp me later. He never did. But in the face of such earnestly held truth, how could I disagree? If you follow Great North Road, turning left not long after Mount Meru filling station, you will come to yet another series of holes, yet another series of openings. Here is the city's Chunga landfill. Decades of accumulating city waste pile up, creating a constantly shifting landscape of discarded matter. It is perhaps the city's largest hole, a pit of the discarded every day. As part of proper landfill management, it is routinely covered with a layer of soil onto which yet more waste is piled again every day, only for the process to be continued, and so on and so on. However, this process is regularly hampered by budget cuts, machine breakdowns, rains which bring cholera outbreaks, and more. And for years, layers of stuff and earth have been compressed and compacted, creating yet more historical strata in Lusaka of wanting and needing and things and waste and taste and got and then used and defective and kitsch and thrown out and then abandoned. And if you follow this cycle year on year, you get a lot of social detritus, distorted and decayed and degenerated until finally it is something new again, secondary raw material ready for excavation. Sources have it that this was also once the site of the headquarters of the independence-era Zambian space program, led by a veteran of the Zambian independence struggle, Director General Edward Festus Mukuka Nkoloso in the 1960s. Through the space program, Nkoloso constructed a rigorous and inventive training course, which included rope swings and repurposed oil barrels. And here you see the rocket of the space program, Cyclops 1, which were used to simulate zero gravity conditions and in class-based study of physics in interstellar bodies. The space program was equipped with several iterations of spacecraft and a team of specially trained astronauts, and led by a Black woman, Martha Mwamba, and her deputy, Godfrey Mwango. Footage and accounts of cadets in training show that Nkoloso's program was taken very seriously. And that this space program was unfolding against the backdrop of Zambian independence is also really important. As Namwali Serpil has argued beautifully, Nkoloso's work throughout his life was closely associated with an active struggle for the emancipation of Zambia's people and people in the region from capitalist colonial control, which constructed Black Africans as inhuman subjects. And in part, this was done through, as Brenna Banda writes, regimes of a kind of proper occupation and utilization of land, which was established through enclosure and privatization of both land and property, which also produced attendant racialized categorizations of whiteness to convey both by whom this proper occupation of land use was conceived and to whom this was made available, so the white settler and colonialist population in the country. The inhumanity of Black Africans was established through their framing in this capitalist colonial project as raw material, not just people, but actually matter to be extracted of value through their subjugation and the exploitation of their productive and reproductive labor, but also through the theft of their land through colonial expansion. And as I try to argue here, it was also through the disavowal or the disregard of ways of land occupation and designing kind of urbanity that were already existing in that space. So it stands to reason that the space program, in seeking to make the break from colonialism, that the newly independent government also undertook a series of economic and social reforms which would radically restructure relationships between people, between property, and also between the earth as well. So this was done through the very radical and really existing project of the abolition of private property and also the nationalization of the mines. So now the country's land and minerals and all of what took place and existed underneath them were no longer matter for generating profit, but rather matter that had the means to enrich the lives and futures of the Zambian population. So despite independence having been achieved for some years, the country's mines had still been under foreign control for the first 4 years of the Zambian project. And economic reforms were initiated by then President Kaunda in a declaration at Mulungushi Rock. This was a key site in the struggle for Zambian independence, just 10 miles north of Broken Hill Mine, the country's first site of colonial mining. So this site, Mulungushi Rock, was a site where minerals quite literally burst from the ground. So remember this kind of the geological formations that I've described before. This is this kind of rocky outcrop where the earth kind of bursts, or the minerals from the earth burst open. And here they create this site, which was perfectly suited to hosting large numbers of people. And it was a site where a lot of the independence movements had kind of gathered to collectively determine, but also to collectivize the ideology that they were building through the anti-colonial movement. And here you see an image of this. President Kaunda declared, I quote, "Political independence without matching economic independence is meaningless. It is economic independence that brings in its wake social, cultural, scientific progress. No doubt political independence is the key, but it is only the key to the house that we must build." So the nationalization which followed initially supported this project of house building, which included government investments in public health and education infrastructure, the construction of the University of Zambia, which is this incredible series of modern structures that you see here, and the University Teaching Hospital in Lusaka, and schools and colleges and district hospitals built throughout the country. And in addition, a state mining conglomerate was formed, which shifted the agenda of the mining industry from extraction and externalization towards social provision through construction, in many cases, for the country's citizens. So working towards the same ends, the concurrent space program required of Zambians to craft a narrative in which Black Africans were themselves no longer seen as resources, as minerals, but were not only free to flourish on Earth, they could aspire to even greater heights too. That this group of Zambian astronauts never made it into orbit is neither here nor there. The project was not solely conceived or concerned with leaving Earth, and nor was it concerned with a future emancipation. Arguably, in conceiving of and constructing the program, Nkolosso's project was already successful. And fittingly, the motto of the program was given in the present indefinite tense. It goes, "Wherever fate and human glory are found, we are always there." This emancipation is ubiquitous. It is occurring wherever. It has occurred and will continue to occur unceasingly into the future. The Zambian astronauts are already always there. Alongside his self-appointed role at the space program, Nkolosso was also Kaunda's presidential representative at the African Liberation Center, which was a headquarters for exiled freedom fighters from the region. Here, he was responsible for supporting combatants by coordinating activities and distributing aid, and also for monitoring their activities in Zambia. So this was complex, and the relationship between different arms within the anti-colonial movements were not always straightforward. Back in Harare, where I come from, in the oral history section at the National Archives, I found reports that showed that Zimbabwean combatants who were exiled in Zambia, as Joshua Nkomo was, at times faced arrest and had their arms confiscated. It was complex, right? The Zimbabwean parties resisted the move to the African Liberation Center, and they preferred to have their own spaces elsewhere in the city. Nkolosso died on the 4th of March, 1989, and he was given a state funeral at the city's premier graveyard, Leopard's Hill Cemetery. I ventured to the site hoping to find a stone, fixed and stable and grounded and inscribed with dates of birth and death, beginnings and endings, and perhaps even some kind of quote or parting words from the man himself. The cemetery is beautiful. I spent several hours sitting on a simple bench pressed against the wall in a cool visiting office, passing time staring at a wasp's nest carefully being constructed against a metal bar in the ceiling, defying gravity. The cemetery officer searched through countless ledgers and records, but ultimately found nothing, no evidence of him having been buried there. So enlisting the support of the cemetery gravediggers, the team and I checked nearly every state-sponsored tombstone emblazoned with the state kind of memorial in memory of our comrade. The details were painted on, names in green, dates in yellow, but over time, the elements have softened these details. The paint has dried off, and in many cases, it's completely impossible to see who's buried there. We quickly found as well that you have to be very careful when moving through the cemetery. In many cases, caskets have been exhumed and now only holes remain, where freedom fighters have taken flight finally to countries of which only dreams existed when they had died: Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Angola, South Africa. Following the boom and bust of global copper markets and successive political interventions towards the privatization and the liberalization of the economy, the social contract forged during the Kaunda years is in tatters. I searched the landfill for vestiges of the former space program, but come the rains, navigating this landscape is almost impossible. It is susceptible to sinkholes, to mudslides, to pools of cloudy water that pose innumerable toxic and bacterial risks, particularly for the community of over 500 waste recyclers who operate on the landfill, digging and filtering and sorting and finding and picking these objects with former lives and turning them into new matter of value. This community are organized as the Chunga Waste Recyclers Association, collectively and successfully agitating for their rights of access, for their livelihoods, for the health and safety, and against the exclusionary forces of privatization which threaten their position, as well as the state's management and provision of services on the site. Women play a key role in the association and occupy leadership positions as a condition of the association's formation. When a cholera outbreak hits the city, the army is deployed to close the landfill, but the association is successful in lobbying to regain access to the site, showing their value to the wider social and material economy of the city and the country, and negotiating improved equipment to support safer working conditions in the process too. Despite appearances, this hole is far from the low end. Workers are here once again reconfiguring the material, metaphysical, and social rules that they have been dealt, organizing and crafting resistance, as well as imaginative projects which contend with coloniality, with injustice. We never find Nkolosso's grave, and I'm moved to wonder if it even exists. But instead, I prefer to follow the motto of the space program. Wherever fate and human glory are found, Nkolosso, the Zambian astronauts, and all those who dream towards a life otherwise are already there. It follows that our work must be attuned to reading the holes, the cracks, the other deceptive absences which abound. Throughout, we must search keenly for the multitude of presents held within these gaps, and ready ourselves for the moment in which to jump out of the little window at the back into a world in waiting already there. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Tandy. Thank you very much. You should have a lot of claps. Thank you for the poetics, but also the depth of rewriting very important histories through the cracks, which I think is outlining very interesting sets of definitions and reflection on praxis. So we'll definitely pick that up. So thank you very much. So without pretending to have any continuity, but really to flow into the multitude, as you were saying, Kinsani, I'll pass you the words, and then we'll see how it goes. So floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Camilo and Tandy. That was absolutely beautiful. I have many notes I've written down, but I will, like everybody else, save that for the end. So I'm going to share my screen, and please also bear in mind that I will shift between two screens. So can I get everyone's confirmation that you are seeing? Oops, that's not what you're supposed to be seeing. Sorry about this. It's
Right.
not what I intended to share. Right. You should see a blue screen.
We see a blue. Yes.
Okay. All of my screens are blue, but this one should have a title saying disruptive by default. Good.
It has.
Right. So yeah, thank you everybody, and thank you Camilo for the wonderful invitation. I think the title towards anti-colonial design is something very close to my practice, and I situate myself in different sort of constellations, and I think it's important to mention that what I will be showing and sharing with you today is part of an ongoing process, ongoing work that I, along with a few other people who are also spatial practitioners in the collective that I founded called Matriarch Architecture, we've been engaging with this work. So this is the work of many people, many minds, and we're constantly in conversation. So I hope to get your voices and critical feedback as well. So disruptive by default, why? To start with this title. I think there's something really, really appropriate that I now link to from Tandi's presentation, which is the sort of disregard of land occupation and in a sense the image of the inhumanity of Black people, which is something that this work speaks to. I'll be introducing notions of movements, notions of counter-publics, which I'm sure many of us have read through the literature of Nancy Fraser, speaking about notions of legibility. And so these words and these themes will come up quite a bit. But as mentioned, the work is coming from matriarchy, and I'll just go through some of these slides. I won't show you the website. I'll jump onto some of the references that will also be sort of theoretically supporting this presentation. The first book that you see is titled The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study. At the moment, I think it's being read across many architecture schools. It's a text that I also teach in collaboration with the curator here at the ETH. And it's a text that really introduces this notion of what Fred Moten and Stefano Hani will call the informal informing form, right? So the sort of fluidity of everyday life, everyday spatial practices constitute a certain spatial intelligence that is ongoing, that is constantly at play, and tends to, if not almost, be overlooked by dominant members and institutions. And we could call architecture with a capital A one of those institutions as well. So the work that we're doing, I spoke about legibility, is trying to sort of resist the controlling images of dominant institutions, which brings me on to the next reference, which will also re-emerge through this presentation. And I'm doing this because they're very inspiring books, and I always encourage others to read the things that I find inspiring. There's a specific chapter in Black feminist thought that was written by Patricia Hill Collins in the year 2000, so maybe old, maybe not. And it's titled The Power of Self-Definition, and really introduces this notion of the controlling image, right? So the controlling image is a sort of image, an identity that's created by dominant members of society and institutions without the consent really of bodies. Now I speak about Black bodies, Black people, Black life, Black study, that sort of frame them according to race, according to gender, according to experiences that are sort of out of our grasp. And so the resisting of these controlling images is something that will be foregrounded in the work that I will show you now. And then the last reference that I'd like to introduce or really emphasize is a specific chapter in Art on My Mind. So Art on My Mind is a compilation of essays, some interviews written and initiated by Bell Hooks. And that specific chapter is called The Black Vernacular Architecture as Cultural Practice. It's incredible. And it speaks particularly using case studies in certain African-American projects in the US, speaking about the spatial intelligences embedded in making in informal contexts, custodianship, and the sort of joy that's embedded in these everyday lived experiences. And so these texts, they really underpin the work that I'll be showing you. Oops. So I hope this works. Do you see the screen, or is it? No, it's not working. I'm going to stop and then I'm going to reshare. So please bear with me. I'll be quite fast with it. So voila. So to contextualize the work, it's important to frame that, the text that I showed you, this is ongoing thinking. This is thematically sort of the backbone of a lot of the work that we're doing. The project that I'm about to introduce was part of the 2021 Chicago Architecture Biennial, which was curated by artistic director David Brown. All of this information you can still find online, so I won't laboriously go through that. But what is important to mention is that the context was a set of, in fact, 10,000 vacant sites in Chicago owned by the state. And we were particularly working on the south side of Chicago, which some of you may know is a predominantly African-American area in Chicago. Chicago is a site, it's a city of inequality. So coming from South Africa, this is something that I could immediately sort of understand, but also didn't claim to fully understand the nuances. And this is something that was really important for us stepping into the project. The project also coincided with the big C, the coronavirus. So it also presented challenges around how to work in the absence of being on site. So it also opened up many doors for collaboration, and I'll get into that more specifically in the next slide. So the reason I'm presenting this work is because it also presents the sort of political backdrop which starts to identify communities that previously were not given attention, but this starts to become part of the agenda of art institutions. And what role do art institutions, what role do architects play in either further perpetuating the exclusion of service provision in such areas, or perhaps causing a necessary disruption? And this disruptiveness by default is something that is not always a choice. So how does our practice engage with that? So voila, it's an interactive presentation. I'm glad that you can bear with me. So voila. So, I will be focusing on two parts of the project. So to just introduce the project, you will see a part of the project which is a physical manifestation, a pavilion. I'll get into that in a moment. And then there's another part of the project which is a platform which we developed, which I'll give more time to. And basically what you see here is a pavilion. The project we titled Reflecting Our Global South Side. The project was located on an area called the Woodlawn. It's sort of colloquially referred to as the Woodlawn on the south side. And it's a site that's kind of not given much attention to. You can see that it was sort of an empty parking lot. The land hadn't been tended to in a number of years. But what we did identify on the site were traces of everyday life that suggested that hanging out was unfolding on a daily basis. That even though it looked like it was something that wasn't necessarily tended to, there was a lot of activity happening on this site. We worked together with a group called In Care of Black Women who live on the south side, who live down the road from here initially, and then we went on to work with another organization called Open Architecture Chicago, who particularly focus on programming for the community in this area. And one of the things that became very clear to us is that with the limited budget, it's a 3-month pavilion. What can we do that sort of creates a sort of a necessary attention on this site, but at the same time sort of questions this notion of leaving trace and this notion of longevity. So what you see on the on one of these poles are barcodes or QR codes, and this is the part of the project that I'd really like to get into. So what we did is we developed a platform which you can find online, oursouthside.net, and it was really a way of documenting our process and speaking about the sort of invisible everyday spatial practices that are very fluid. They're not form-based, but they constitute social life on the south side of Chicago. And with this question that the available city presented us with, how to intervene, we became more curious with foregrounding or making visible that which was already there. So the pavilion which you see was a sort of playful act to get people on site, really inviting them into this virtual world that starts to unsettle the notion of archive. As we discussed with Open Architecture Chicago, you see these two guys, they look exactly the same because they're running the organization. When we spoke with Open Architecture Chicago, it became very clear that there were resonances between us, referring to our South Side in the collective as South Africa and Botswana. We were mostly concerned with these sites as we're local to them. And resonances between our South Sides and the South Side of Chicago, but how to communicate that, how to, in a sense, give a sort of impression of that. And as spatial practitioners, we thought it would be really interesting to create some sort of platform that could make visible, make legible, perhaps, some of these everyday spatial practices. And one of the things that became very clear to us was that you can't find any of this online. You can't find, try to Google public space South Africa, and you will not be met with the reality of 80% of the population, the Black population. You won't be met with the everyday lived experience that they encounter, and I use they and we sort of interchangeably. So I'm going to go into the platform so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about when we started to really exchange on some of the encounters that we had come across. And so just to mention, when you would be on site, you would scan one of the barcodes and then you would arrive at a certain page. You wouldn't arrive at the home page. But now, because the pavilion no longer exists, I'm showing you the platform in a way that is of course entered through just being online, not being in between. So I'll just share. Oh, this is not the right. I really apologize for this, but we will get through. So as I mentioned, what we did was really try to, in exchanging with one another, understand or ways of engaging, ways of gathering everyday spatial practices that are encountered on the south side of Chicago, but that we could relate to as also foreign people to the south side. And at the same time, in this process, really trying to give nuance, but also allow ourselves to be faced with some sort of discontent within images of Black life that are not homogenous, of course. And so what that sort of arrived at was a series. You see a few, but there were many, many more. A series of tags. I wouldn't even call them categorizations because they grow and they're fluid and they're susceptible to change, that we had essentially identified and used as a way to provoke conversation between our relative south sides. So I'll go into an example, for instance, let's go to food is social. And one of the things that we did was we set up a conversation, a back-end conversation with Open Architecture Chicago, who were in direct communication with the community on the south side, who were constantly documenting certain sites of encounter on the south side, as we had also been, and we continue to document within matriarchy, sometimes lending from others, but of course we build upon what is there and don't claim to be doing anything brand new. And so one of the categorizations we came up with was, of course, food is social, and really trying to find a way of communicating across Black life with the organization we were working with, And really then starting to learn about these existing counterpublics outside of Chicago, which of course were not happening on vacant sites, but were happening in ephemeral ways. They had certain temporalities that were failed to be recognized, this happened sort of parallel to the architecture biennial, which was sort of prepositioning that there needed to be a sort of intervention, a filling up of vacant space, so that emptiness was always read as something that had nothing existing before. So we used the project, we used every section or every tag that we created as a way of really pointing the organization to some of the existing encounters of spatiality that exist, but also as a way of us allowing ourselves to learn from one another, really, across our respective South sides. And this became very exciting because we were also met with a lot of difference. We were also sort of challenging ourselves to remain critical of what it means to be put into a larger controlling image that says that Black study is XYZ. And at the same time, I must mention that this project is really a beta version of what will continue to be a platform where you can directly engage with communities, be part of a community as a way of also creating precedents and sort of countering the notion that material culture creates a valid type or a valid sort of archetype. And so we at the same time were very conscious of not trying to romanticize some of the material conditions of our South Sides, which we're familiar with. We know that, for instance, a spaza shop, I'm looking at Tandy because you probably are familiar with a spaza shop. But, spaza shops provide social services to the vast majority of Black people who live in townships, informal settlements in South Africa. They create as a byproduct of that a sort of counter-public, providing light, providing Wi-Fi, providing all kinds of services that bring people together, and at the same time, by no means are in safe conditions, or the material sort of conditions of these places are not something that we're necessarily advocating for. But what we are trying to foreground in this project are the sort of urban and architectural spatial intelligences embedded in these examples. And so we do this as a way of unsettling type. We do this also as a way of pointing the institutions that we all work in at the same time to really being forced to work in a collaborative way with these sites in order to fully understand them. So it's also an entry point, which I must mention. Now I go back to the slideshow. So I think when I speak about disruptiveness, it's also pointing to the sort of everyday life that I think Yasmina Bibijon speaks really at length about, but at the same time really suggesting that there is no sort of choice that many Black communities have in determining the normalization of that. And so we're also kind of in a constant conversation with these encounters as perhaps needing to be put into some sort of typological representation, but at the same time forcing ourselves to rethink representation otherwise. And someone like Nishat Awan is exploring that at length in her mapping, and it's something that I would also point you all to. Where's this move? And so I spoke about that back end. This is how we worked. I really do like to share process because I think it also it's something that we constantly learn from, and it's something that you can see we really started with more, let's say, general ways of categorizing architecturally, forms of gathering on the streets, and we allowed ourselves to collapse. The first chapter of The Undercommon speaks about collapse. It's a preface written by Jack Halberstam, and speaks about, you know, the sort of ongoingness of undercommoning practices and presences that start to decorrupt the word collapse and make it a positive term, allowing us to also give ourselves the necessary time to spend in these sites, whether they're familiar or unfamiliar with us, as a way of also understanding their spatial intelligence. So we're using this process as a way of reconfiguring fieldwork, otherwise, if you like, because we recognize the sort of wall that we reach when we use the fieldwork methods that we were taught, at least at architecture school. And so, as I mentioned, you know, in some of the texts that I had introduced, I think it's also really helpful to return to that which has already been theoretically explored. And, you know, Bell Hooks writes about this. I'm conscious of time, so I won't read it. I normally like to recite and read together. But this is something that comes directly from that text. Yeah, I will read it. Let's read it out loud together, right? So she says, you know, few scholars theorize the Black experience from a standpoint that centralizes the perspectives of poor and working class folks. Yet to ignore this standpoint is to reproduce a body of work that is neocolonial insofar as it violently erases and destroys those subjugated knowledges that can only erupt, disrupt, and serve as acts of resistance if they are visible, remembered. Documentation of a cultural genealogy of resistance invites the making of theory that highlights cultural practices which transforms ways of looking and being in a manner that wrests reinscription by prevailing structures of domination. These are some impressions of the site with our pavilion in it, and it's, I suppose it was a way of us also, really trying to find a playful way of inviting people to learn about their surroundings. We got a lot of impressions afterwards because what we did on our platform was ask people to, after they had visited our pavilion, take images of their South Side, take images of their favorite part of town, and sort of submit that to us. And that's the beginning of a sort of a collective way of inputting into an archive. And this sort of stayed, you know, we hope to make it a memorable pavilion as temporary as it was. And we insisted to paint the ground, of course, to leave that necessary trace that people could talk about what was there before. So the ground hasn't been cleared, thank goodness. They don't pay attention to the site, and the circles are still there. And it was really wonderful because we also engaged with different kinds of artistic practitioners who then also developed site-specific impressions of the pavilion, but also of activities that would occur around this pavilion at the time of its presence. So, for instance, one of the events that we had on the side was a poetry reading with these 4 wonderful poets, Dr. Clara Betts, Emerald Green, Chiara D. Miller, and Leslie Honoré. And this is something you can also find online. So there was a sort of very temporary, ephemeral narration of that space during the time that this pavilion existed. And that remains a proposition to how we might unsettle this notion of evidence production so deeply embedded in our profession, but at the same time leaving a necessary trace so that which we remember and that which travels, and speaking about ideas and encounters and these spatial intelligences, can be built upon by others or can be encountered by others thereafter. So we try to engage with other sorts of spatial and artistic practitioners outside of architecture. Some more impressions. this was also quite random. I thought to include it because it was quite nice that some bicyclists decided to find a little dwelling spot in our pavilion. And then I will, I think, sort of come to a close in reading one more quote, which I draw from the second text which I introduced you to, Black Feminist Thoughts. And what you see in blue is are my notes. I tend to engage in text like this in conversation, so I will read that as well, and as a way, in that way, close my contribution. So by persisting, the process is ongoing. In the journey towards self-definition, as individuals, we are changed. When linked to group action, our individual struggles gain new meaning, relations, a fluid archive. Because our actions as individuals change the world from one in which we merely exist to one over which we have some control, they enable us to see everyday life as being in process and therefore amenable to change. The volatility of architecture is an inherent characteristic of it. And with that, I will end. That's the last slide.
Thank you. Thank you, Kensai. Thanks a lot. Again, another big virtual clap. Thank you very much for this. It's super interesting to see both the continuity around the genealogy of the practice, but also the necessity to engage with other forms of materiality. And I'm very happy you brought up an interesting terminology, which is both the notion of archive, but specifically the one of institution, which I think we need to pay an absolutely fundamental dimension of attention into, and not only institution as, institution as we normally know, but the institution as they percolate to a different forms of material. So really, really, thank you very much. I know that the tempo and the temporality is always an issue, but let's move to Salma. Salma, we haven't even tested the mic, which I hope you. Hey,
not
excellent.
Even my voice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You can hear me well, right?
Yes,
yeah?
we can.
Okay.
Do you want me to share, or you are able to share?
I'm using my husband's laptop, so let's try to make this work. If it doesn't,
right.
Let's see.
Excellent.
Because I'm not used to that.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I can do this in full screen. No, I can't. So maybe we'll have to stick with that. Is that fine, or should we?
No. It's absolutely fine. Just go ahead.
Perfect.
Thank
you. Hi everyone. It's really great to be here and great to be back in class, in virtually even. And also it's extremely humbling to be side by side with two amazing presentations. Thanks Knazi and thanks Tandy. It was very informative presentations. So this is the title of my presentation. It is Otherism, and just to I tried to like touch upon the overarching theme of today's webinar, as finding alternative practices and alternative narratives to try to really find a way to navigate through lots of experiences and things that I've done, and just really tie them together. So today was actually a really good exercise for myself to really make sense and look back at so many, because sometimes you when you're not, at least in academia, you really do not have the chance to stand and reflect and make sense of practice working in somewhere like UN Habitat. So to start off, I just wanted to give a little bit of brief about who I am and what I do. And again, as I said, this is also a personal journey to make sense of what it is and what it means to me of having alternative practice, alternative narratives, and otherism in general. So yeah, I'm Salma. I work at UN Habitat as a program associate for the urban development program. I am a buddy, very proudly so. I graduated in 2017, and I've been working liberally in so many projects up until I started in 2019 with UN Habitat, which marked a little bit of actually a forward narrative, like a single narrative, single agenda of having to work and serve the government and serve the people essentially, and being this link in between. But so yeah, again, I said today was, it is, sorry, what do I do? Yeah, okay. So, so the objective of today's talk, and essentially also to reflect with the panel, because I can't wait, because I have so many notes that I've written down with the rest from the previous presentations, is to really try to break the domination of mainstream narratives. And yeah, it's the main takeaway, like even including myself. I really want to see how we can rewire our brains to constantly question mainstream narratives of development, of design, of storytelling, and narratives in general, and to continuously allow ourselves to widen the scopes and literally break the domination of a single narrative or single practice that I consider myself working towards, but also having this other side and other exploration and parallel practice. I mean, just to feed into and into combine the narrative in general, because the power of a single narrative is extremely dangerous, and it's even dangerous to our planet, and we can even see that over the past few years, and it is one of the most threatening things we are facing right now. So as the presentation unfolds, I would just like to give a brief overview about the context that I dwell and work in the most of my life and my career. So I'm from Cairo, and I'm from Egypt. And this has been one of the biggest drivers of why I do what I do, and I still do it. So in my nutshell, Egypt is 110 million people. It's situated in the heart of heart of the Middle East, the corner of Africa, and I'm so happy that Africa is predominantly availing itself today in the talk. It is a post-colonial country. It has been occupied for about 80 years in total, and all the way up to the mid-20th century. And I particularly chose these two photos to represent Egypt and represent what it means to be here, because these two photos really do show you how much people are extremely condensed around the Nile, and they only occupy 4% of the entire geographic land of the country, which reflects a lot about density and population and informality, if I can say so. There are some debates that 40 to 60% of people live in informal settlements, and in informality in general, and what the government would identify as informal. So this is also something that is quite important to note. Here, yeah, the other big only sole driver of what I do is Cairo. I'm going to just run through very quick realities and images of Cairo, of just to show some, as Kantani was saying, there are some ungoogled images that if you Google them, you will not be able to get where, I mean, the algorithm will not show you many of it. So it's a 22 million people metropolitan city, which is spread out over 3,000 kilometers, and it is extremely congested. I mean, here I came across this this map from amazing initiatives from, they call Ashra Tuba in Arabic. It means 10 tuba or 10 bricks. They have been mapping out how the population growth was accommodated across the old city, which is in orange, the pink cities, which are the new satellite desert cities out in the desert, which are almost twice the size of Cairo, and the green ones, which is what they call informal. So over the last 15 years, the population growth was mostly 74% of the population growth, which is 3.5 million people, were only accommodated in informal settlements, opposed to 700,000 people in so many investments in the desert cities, which brings us also to question this kind of, who are we catering to, and what kind of development is the regime or the government as catering to. But yeah, so this is a very typical informal settlement view. They are properly, sky high buildings, red brick buildings built over agricultural land. This is a very typical image of informal settlements in Cairo. This is also another reality. This is one of the only public spaces not really free, ticketed public parks in Cairo. Lined by it's a very old city now turned into an informal settlement, and here what we call the dead city, because people dwell, because cemeteries, as the ancient Egyptians, are built in like houses, and people actually live in it with actual buried people. Here also, this is another image of parallel realities, compounds, gated communities, informal settlements, and I think this is very typical to many global South cities. And here, before we move on, this is in 2015, the government has decided to launch this initiative to build a new capital 45 kilometers away east of Cairo, which it's sucking out so many investments away in the desert to, shift of power, shift of administration, but also this is something just to give you a sense of what kind of landscape, political landscape, geopolitical landscape is happening in Cairo. These two images are of Cairo, and we'll show you the crawl and either on agricultural land or through the desert. So these two images have 40 years in between, and roughly this is where the new capital is. This is a 2019 image, but it's currently, it's much more developed now, so it's here. Which now brings me to the idea of othering and starting off this presentation. The reality of parallel narratives, the reality of being unrecognized. I started to really reflect on what is othering mean, because othering could be one or the other, and it could be one narrative or the other. And it's that duality that I think is very problematic. And I guess that sometimes othering is invisible and irrelevant. It's inaccessible. And inaccessibility can be inaccessible informal settlement to the other, or an inaccessible, very high-end gated community. It's asymmetrical, it's inferior, it's stigmatized, it's controlled, and it's racist. And these are all out of so many readings and so a lot of time trying to squeeze my head, trying to really make sense of the flow of this presentation. But I think these are very powerful keywords that we can tack upon later. I came across this and I find this very interesting because this is the Garden City at the heart of downtown Cairo. It was built in the late 19th century by French architects trying to replicate a small Paris in Cairo. And the way that it is built, it's built in a maze-like urban design because it is inhabited by very rich elitist people back then and even now. And the whole idea of that was because of the neighboring neighborhoods, because they're mostly from a different social class. If they go through the Garden City, they'll probably be lost and will find their way out. And so it's just a hostile design, designed in a way, I mean, it later evolved in, like, this concept later evolved in more of gated communities, actual fences, barricades, preventing one or the other to enter. But I found it very interesting of how urban design can really other people just so subtly and in a very hostile manner. Here, this also brings me back to how I think that up there are very high-end neighborhoods gated, and down there are these are the governmental community housing units, and they are both very typical, both repetitive, and they're both fenced. And again, this also questions the idea of the separation and the segregation and what that means and how this can be an extremely dangerous matter if you really try to overlook and not even make accessible one or the other to each one. So yeah, I wanted to really quickly show you the context again of a very, very big metropolitan city and situated in Egypt. And because it has been one of the main drivers of my questioning, my curiosity, and my inquiry in general, and because doing what I do. And this is a project that I worked on from 2016, even 2016 to 2019, and it was exploring the sewer cover. It was exploring the actual cover of sewers in the streets of Cairo and what they mean. So I even thought about like even the idea of othering and the idea of having parallel narratives. They don't really necessarily have to be like a friction between two groups of two social classes, two different races, but also beyond the human-centric realm. So this project was a mapping project. It is an art project from the beginning, but also it has been developing very well. It developed very well to be something that made sense of what that means and what it actually could inform future practices, at least mine. This is a quote that I used in the exhibition and throughout my research and mapping the sewer cover was les goûts et la conscience de la vie, or the sewer is the conscience of the city. Because yeah, and I realized that also the sewage system and the sanitation systems have been a very significant element in so many cities, not only here, but it was quite interesting how Cairo addressed it and how Cairo treats it. So this is one of the very first sewer covers that I came across, and I thought that it was quite interesting because when I was just walking by it, going somewhere, and I realized that there is Heliopolis is the place where I found it, and the middle part is what it was the flag of Egypt at that point. So it immediately struck me that this is a time this is an actual time capsule, or a timestamp of something that has been probably ever since, because I was in Heliopolis, so it really verified my position, and also, I mean, was a witness of history ever since the 1910s and 1920s. So I quickly realized that I needed to question if this is a pattern, and I started this just game of hunting down more and more sewer covers across the city. And I found plenty. I photographed around 300 sewer covers across the city in 5 different neighborhoods, and not a single one was similar to the other. And what I found very intriguing, that the actual, like, the dissimilarity between each one of them is meaning that they all tell different stories, all tell different narratives, and they can even falsify or verify some events, or some because some of them can actually just say maybe most of them say Cairo, and some of them may actually say different names of cities. So that really meant that these sewer covers were were in a different city, and because the centrality of how the drainage system works in Egypt, it could have been moved from one city to the other and then placed where it needs to be. So the next question for me was thinking about the pattern, and thinking about this as an urban constituent. And this pattern might really describe a problem or describe a solution, such as so many informal acts or not. But a pattern also, like Christopher Alexander, A Pattern Language book, also puts it out there. It's really describes a problem and the solution together, if it's something that you really notice over 1 million times over. And again, I started questioning, and also I started questioning, why would it, if it exists, means it's relevant. It's relevant to a bigger pattern. And this is also one of the things that the Christopher Alexander mentions, that if there is a pattern, it's probably part of a larger one and a larger story. And paying attention to that and trying to think about it as an agent to spatial practice. So it really caught my attention to continue hunting them down, and eventually mapping them. Some of them even had, this is Mubarak, it has the name Mubarak, which is the former president before the 2011 Arab Spring. So they were not only an act of just a function, but also it could have been an act of resistance. And even this one is also, I find, very interesting. Moving on, digging deeper, and what I started looking at what the sanitation system and drainage system meant to Cairo. And it was, I mean, as very well expected, it is a colonial introduction, but I came across these two excerpts from the Lancet in the early 20th century. And this is a writer, or someone who's, he's a British reporter, trying to report on the situation in Cairo with the drainage system. And I found it very interesting, intriguing, also how they position, I mean, drainage systems were introduced to save Europeans from epidemics. And this is the whole reason for its existence from the beginning. And again, this sparked so many other questions of how the drainage system evolved, and how the idea of colonialism, class, and sanitation, which like really verifies what Victor Hugo, which the the quote that I shared at the beginning. It's like, it is like the sewer is the conscience of the city, describing and unveiling social class through the sanitation and drainage system. So, oops, no, sorry. This is quite, sorry for that. Thank you for, yeah. Okay, so we finally put this together, me and the team of amazing practitioners. Some of them are just artists and others are young architects. We put this in a book, in a photo book, where we mapped we mapped 5 neighborhoods with different sewer covers, and geotagged each sewer cover with respect to its location in the certain neighborhood and what each inscription means in relationship to the neighborhood. This was in 2019, and this is how the project, ended. But it was also this is the team behind the collaboration and the exhibition. It also had there was a book. There was a documentary that you can find if you scan this QR code. Is unfortunately in Arabic, but there are some. The project received quite a lot of media coverage, and you can find so many interviews done in English to explore the project and read about it more. And yeah, one thing that I wanted to also mention about Carapolitan, which were the major collaborator for this exhibition. Carapolitan, I find them very interesting. We actually created this coaster made out of a Cairo sewer cover, but it is looking at small patterns and repeated patterns of the city, trying to make commodities and merchandise with them. And I find this very powerful because it really gives the non-human pattern or non-human other a voice, a recognition. So yeah, this is part of what they do. So I think from the previous presentation is that Kintani, you said like foregrounding and make visible and to make legible, and also the danger of over romanticizing patterns of either they are from informal settlements or from just the streets of a city. But one of the main takeaways that no pattern exists in vacuums. Recognition does really, I think it's a bit debatable, but to me, I think recognition in and of its own, yes, it's an act of resistance, but also does not grant parity. And I think there must be more to come with just recognition, shedding light and giving voice. And practice should not really contribute to a single narrative that really marginalizes an urban constituent, human or non-human. The next few slides was just a way to really reflect on what I do currently at the UN and working with the Egyptian government. And I really couldn't cease but realize that some or many of the mega infrastructure development projects really have a very big role to legitimizing the single narrative. And I just took off like snippets of bits and pieces of some projects that have been going on. So it's a very colorful slide, but this colorful slide is it really depicts something really brutal that happened because the government wanted to have 6 more lanes added to the ring road that circles the entire metropolitan area of Cairo. So I mean, most of the informal settlements are situated outside the city, and essentially the ring road goes through them or around them or actually next to them. So in order, if you can see this photo, in order for the ring road to be the width of the ring road to be maximized, they needed to put buildings down. And the way informal settlements are built in Cairo, they build wall to wall. They do not build separate buildings or separate shacks. They share a single wall. So they had to really shear cut the buildings and run them down, because in all cases, the government had the right, because these are illegal structures. But it was, to me, it's a very brutal exposing. I mean, it puts the informal settlements and people living there at in a point where they don't matter and their homes don't matter. So it was a really questionable act to, I mean, the government had the full right to put down any building that is illegal, but the way that it was done over so much, like more than 200 kilometers, was a little bit questionable and brutal for me. So this is also a practice that I think is, I mean, I'm developing, but again, I'm legitimizing the idea of the other, and the idea of people living in informal settlements are illegitimate, illegal, and so on. Here, also another project that I think, I mean, it was a relocation project for people who are living in former residents of unsafe areas, which were eradicated because, I mean, some of them were living or settling under a mountain that collapsed, a rocky mountain that collapsed. I mean, so the idea of relocation was very legitimate, very urgent. But again, it rehoused 80,000 people, and 80,000 people in a very typical, I don't know, gated community in one of I mean, let's say 20 kilometers away from Cairo center. But again, it is a questionable act if having it gated, because it's highly secured, highly gated, because it was initiated by the president, and it's just identical, typical buildings, exactly like the informal settlements. I mean, not exact. I mean, they took away the creativity of having what happens in the informal settlements, and they just put them in blocks. Yeah, and
Salma, sorry, we are really up with time, so
yeah, I'm done.
Okay, thank you.
I'm done.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I know I'm brutal, but I do apologize. Thank you very much, and I think you again another fantastic contribution. May I ask you just to unshare the screen, if it's possible, and without any further ado, I'm asking everybody either online or in the room to intervene with the comments. I think Tandy has to leave in a few moments, but or Tandy, if you want to intervene with some message now that you have seen all the different people or question too, and then the people online, and then we'll try to have a little moment of conversation, but maybe not too much. So Tandy, I give you the floor to you if you want to say something, or anybody from the room if you want to start.
Yes. Thank you both for these amazing presentations. I think one thing that I was really struck by was this thinking about globalized solidarities, I suppose, or thinking about places from different contexts as well. And I think Kantana, you were talking about our South or South, I think, which is really interesting, right? Like, and similarly, Salma, how you find traces of other places within Cairo and what that sort of unpacking what that means. So I think that that's a really productive space to be working in terms of anti-colonial urban interventions or urban design. And I thought it's really powerful the way it came up a lot in the presentations. And then I think also, you know, we talked about the undercommons, we talked about landfills, we talked about sewers. I think there's so much richness in these so-called kind of discarded sites or sites of waste, because, you know, capitalism is like incredible. Capitalism and colonialism relies, one of its main outputs is the production of waste. And so these are such rich sites for the production of alternatives, the production of contestations. I found that really powerful that it was present across all of the presentations.
Thank you very much. And there has been, you know, the before you can intervene anytime, of course. One of the, I see that each of you spoke through which aside within each other's, and I think this is also a very interesting way of understanding practices, not as you said, homogeneous, unilateral, monolithic, but always in a process. Now, we knew that process is a terminology that emerged in the 70s, but, you know, process in the sense that is, and I think you're very right, that is never completely done, formed, is still going somehow, either in the form of imposed, you know, space narrative, if you want, or ground narrative. But what is remain very interesting is that all those processes are settling and unsettling at the same time. And you're right, all of you were looking at soils as land, as the matter, and that materiality of the matter, even when it's connected across different sites, is a super interesting material of the archive that you have been using. So I think there is a numbers of very interesting close reading. Anyone from the room wants to intervene with the questions, with a comment?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, we have someone having questions. So there's a chair here, and whoever has questions is going to come and talk to you.
Thank you very much. And for the online friends, there is a opportunity for a question and answer. Please.
Hi. Sandy, I had specifically a comment regarding what you were saying. I know that everyone spoke about the ground and the soil and sort of a presence or an absence of something within it. And I just wanted to say that it's really beautiful that you spoke specifically about the exploitation of productive and reproductive labor that goes on the ground. And I just wanted to say that the mining industry in India is actually very similar to the one in Zambia. There's a hole being made, which is supposed to be the largest coal mine in the world in central India. And it's going to be as big as Delhi, which is around 18,000 square kilometers. And it's displaced a lot of tribes and their livelihoods as well. And I think that's a very similar scenario to the exploitation in Zambia. And the poetic way with which you talked about this narrative took me to like the catacombs in Europe, to you know, even the tunnels and infrastructural systems in Hong Kong that exist today, because they have a lot of underground infrastructure that, especially for getting rid of waterlogging and flooding. It's really interesting that you talked about water being stored at the bottom, which could actually be used for the city. And just one more thing. Oh yeah, also that political independence is the key, but the only, but it's only a key to the house that we need to build. That's also, it really shows like the practical jump almost that needs to be taken at some point from ethics. And I'm glad you could highlight that. Thank you so much. And lovely. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I didn't know about this new mine. That's incredible. You know, I was recently introduced to. I really loved your response, because you were talking about all of the kind of the devastation, but also all of the productive forces that take place within, right? Which is what I was really trying to get to. And I was recently introduced to the work of Marina Otero-Bezier and Godofredo Enes Pereira, who you might be interested in. And they have been looking at these practices in relation to lithium mines, where particularly in Portugal and I think in Atacama in Chile, whereby the miners feel this real affinity with the life within the earth, to the point where they will make offerings to the devil and feel this closeness to the devil. And part of their protests with mining companies has been to bring the figure of the devil out of the mine and out of the depths of the earth, which I think is so interesting, because it's like the mining company operates within the logics of economics, exploitation, but you present them with the devil and like they don't know what to do with that, right? So I think there's like a richness of what can come out of the earth that can inform our movements in really interesting ways. So I definitely recommend looking at their work. I think you'll get a kick out of it.
Could you say the names of the authors again?
I'll drop it in the chat.
Yes, please.
Drop it in the chat, but I also can say that Marina will be with us next week on Friday, same time. So we definitely take advantage of that, and was a very so. Kinsani, do you want to say something? Salma, you want to say something? There is anyone else in the room? And Tandy, we really thank you very much, but feel free to go anytime without. We want really to thank you, of course.
Thank you. Take care. See you.
Kinsani, off to you, Salma, and then the room and anybody else.
Yeah, I would love to firstly say thank you. I mean, Tandy just left. Thank you, Salma, for your contribution. This was really, I think, what struck me the most is this notion of storytelling, right? Becoming an increasingly more present part of architectural spatial practice. I think it would be, for me, really interesting to hear the sort of reception from the UN, from the government of your project, the CSC project. And I ask because at least, you know, the context in Zurich, you know, where I teach, has not yet sort of recognized storytelling agency of practicing in the way in which, I mean, at least Tandy is doing so incredibly. And I think that this notion of revealing rather than exposing has so much potential. You know, as spatial practitioners, we have the sort of dexterity to visualize, to manifest the urgency within the processes of eventually, if at all, intervening, but at least using that method as the mode of expressing urgency and desire. At least in the case of our project, we were trying to also, in a sense, reveal the already present everyday spatial practices that bring about joy, even if some of them are born out of resistance. And so I really like, as you spoke about recognition, because Moten and Hani in their book, and I really encourage everybody to read it. It's very close to me, and particularly, you know, the second half of the book is an interview between Moten and Hani. It's a really nice entry point into the text, and then the preface is written by Jack Halberstam, who writes and introduces the undercommons in a more theoretical way, but also sort of contextualizes it in a political context. So I say all of that to mention that one of the things that they describe is that the undercommons, you know, sort of these informal practices they don't need to be saved. They've been operating despite the lack of care that they've been given by dominant members of society. But you know, the way in which we're operating, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because it's a claim, seems to be also asking dominant members of society to not intervene, but to sort of redistribute, right? Commission and broadcast, because the university is the site of broadcasting, and the states, at least I can imagine in Cairo, the states and the UN, these are sites of commission. And I find this way of practicing storytelling as practicing really valuable way of transmitting desires and urgencies across commissioner and let's say researcher, and we find ourselves at a school because it's the place where we can at least support our livelihoods through the work that we do. So I've said a lot of things because this is how I situate my practice as well. But it would be nice to hear from you the reaction from the UN and the reaction from the states.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for reflecting on that, because it's also very enriching, and also it makes me reflect. So I did this before I joined, and again, it was quite a shift in mentality coming out of the DPU, having this fresh out of the oven. Storytelling to the Egyptian government in general, as a general realm, is a very threatening tool of resistance. And I mean, it's just how you, I mean, I even had this conversation with Camilo before that maybe the kind of counter-narrative storytelling art coming out of the safe space, which is the university, is the safest place to tell it. But from otherwise, it's a little bit threatening, and hence the UN would be appreciative, as individuals, but not as an institution, because again, as I said, it's a very threatening tool to the political landscape. And I also told Camilo that earlier last year, the camera was just, legally allowed to be on the street. And this in and of its own is something that tells you, because this is how you kind of really tell stories, and the way that I even took my photos of the sewer cover, because the officers wouldn't care less. She's taking a photo of the sewer cover. I was really in the street doing the field work. There were a lot of points where I was questioned, what are you doing? Why do you have a camera? And then they see me taking a photo of the ground of the sewer cover with something that they think is disgusting. So it really did not matter, but it is a threatening element or tool of resistance. But recently, in the wake of COP27 being in Egypt and human rights and so on and so forth, the camera just got allowed to be on the street with certain legal permissions.
Thank you, Sana, and thank you, Kinsa. I think this is a very interesting element. Please, anybody from the room, jump on the chair to whenever you want. I think this comment is super interesting, because we shouldn't forget that, you know, the reality and the sites, the places, the soils you've spoken with from Peru are sites of violence, of different forms, of course, even in the violences, you know, not allowing a specific forms of knowledge or visibility or project to emerge. So I think this is an absolutely very interesting element too, and actually not recognizing that knowledge is an act of possibly colonialism to a certain extent, in terms of epistemic colonialism, for sure. So, sorry, please, the room, I see, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, thank you for those talks. It was really interesting, and yeah, important topics, I think. I've got one question specifically for Ganassi. You mentioned this, that you were wanted to redefine the word collapse. I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit and what you mean by that. And just another question for anyone. The idea of uncovering hidden or alternative or otherwise narratives and histories. Obviously, kind of by definition, you're looking for things that are hidden. So I'm just wondering, like, where do you start with that? Do you, as Salma says, do you sort of go in your everyday life and just see something and then go, I'm going to start digging, or do you really have to search? Keep going.
Thank you. Very difficult question. Over to you.
The chicken or the egg? Thank you very much for your question. So, I mean, I'll start with collapse. And I must really say that the person to read, the work of the person to read is Jack Halberstam. Jack Halberstam speaks about collapse and speaks about it particularly. I mean, Jack Halberstam is not an architect, right? They're sort of speaking about spatial matters. And they speak particularly about, or at least in a recent lecture that I had the pleasure of attending, they speak particularly about the sort of tensions in what it means to restore and recreate with the matter that we have around us being, as Camilo mentioned, inherently sort of subject to violence. So this conversation of collapse is also born out of one that is faced with questions around sustainability, around construction, around how we might create something, reimagine something, at least, you know, I'm speaking more within the global Southern context, with the matter that we have that didn't necessarily favor us from the moment of its conception. So what Jack Halberstam suggests is that looking at collapse as something positive gives us a sort of freedom to, you know, rethink those materials, but also rethink the sort of more intangible elements, you know, sort of social encounters, memories embedded in those materials, such that it gives us the room to reimagine. Actually, you know, they quite radically say that if we don't think with this notion of collapse in mind in sites that have been subject to extreme violence, then there is no way of creating something that doesn't add to, you know, even to a small extent, reproduce some of the logics of that violence. And so, you know, I'm paying a lot of attention to Jack at the moment, you know, trying to also grapple that term myself, because we're faced with this question of constructing all the time, very necessarily so, but at the same time wanting to introduce at a moment, you know, the project that I showed you, we at a moment also had to try and understand, okay, how much does the physical manifestation of this pavilion link to the process of the platform that we're linked to the actual everyday practices that we're introducing? And, you know, we realized that the ways in which people were gathering required a different kind of time frame to the sort of production or the construction of the spaces that we're often tasked to do as builders. So it's I think it's yeah, this is what I can say about collapse. I don't know if I'm giving you much of an answer, but there's a recording of a lecture given by Jack Halberstam on collapse that you can find if you look up. I'll drop it in the chat box. If you look up queer format ETH, I'll send you the link, and yeah, this is my offer.
Excellent. I know you have to leave very soon, Kinsani, so we want to close it immediately, and you feel free to go at any time, and we want to thank you again very so much. Salma, you want to say something specifically to the question? Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your question, because this is also a question that I think we need to all ask ourselves. But I think some elements are extremely obvious. You don't really need to have to dig deep, as you said, and sort of try to hunt down certain patterns. But it brings me back to the idea of pattern language and repetitiveness, and looking for like urban constituents, I mean, if we only think of the city, of looking at urban constituents that are necessarily repeated in the way that they most probably trying to shout something or shout a different narrative that is being either silenced or invisible, or people just overlook. I mean, like the sewer cover. But there's this work of a colleague, an Egyptian colleague, that she just started to map a pattern, the pattern languages in informal settlements and what they mean in the kind of insurgency, and looking at the city being handmade, like literally being handmade, and looking at the problem and how they address the solution. And this was a way to learn from the pattern rather than just first dissect it and then try to broadcast it in a way that how can I learn from this act that necessarily gets demolished or just eradicated once the government intervenes. So yeah, this would be my take on that. Some of them are extremely obvious, trying to shout something, and it's just our role as urban designers, as practitioners, architects, is to recognize your positionality and your responsibility towards, trying to be as integral as you can, because this is a bit utopian to try to accommodate for everyone all the time at every instance. But it is also even the question of how you position yourself as a practitioner, and how you question who are you catering to and the user and so on. I hope it answers your question.
Thank you, Salma. Thank you again for the question. I'm really conscious about time, and thank you, Kensani. Thanks a lot for sharing your time and project with us. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you very soon. Thanks. I'm very conscious with time, so I wonder whether if there is any other comments or question urgent from the room or online. I'd be inclined to get to a close. And thank you. Yeah, Laia.
I think we are fine here.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm happy to get a close. Salma, thank you very much. We already thanks the people, and we got a little bit of delay because of the setup, but I think, and thank you everybody that was connected online. There are several people I keep seeing there. It's a very interesting opportunity to have a conversation, and I do really think that each of the people today were conversating somehow, talking one through with each other. So, and you know, the topic is quite complicated, and we touch upon many different things. For sure, the notion of storytelling, for sure, the notion of land in relation to land as a soil, as a matter, but also specifically the one of the future. I think we have a lot to continuously inquiry around this idea of imagination that we still have to maintain, either political or spatial, for sure. So while thanking you very much, I'm just calling you for the next appointment, which is next Friday at the same time, online as usual. And we have two other people, Marina that we mentioned already, Marina Otero, and Nada Efeituri, which is another alumni, and we'll definitely get into a sort of cross-site and cross-generational, I would say, conversation. So thank you very much, everyone, and good luck and good afternoon to everybody. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, Salma.